Kia ora, Mike. Kia ora, students in New Zealand, I guess. Dobar ranak. Dobar ranak is Ukrainian for good morning. So I'm going to answer the questions that Mike sent me, and we'll get into it. Mr. Gates, I suppose. I don't know. Do you use first names? In Ukraine, all my students call me Steve. So I'm a teacher in Ukraine. So a lot of the things that are maybe there's a lot of differences, I guess, in school in Ukraine and school in New Zealand. What was the vibe in Ukraine the days before the invasion or before you left? It was calm because we left on the 14th and the missiles started on the 24th of February. So the war started on the 24th. At 4 o'clock in the morning, missiles were fired from positions in Belarus and positions in Russia and the occupied territories of Ukraine, and they took out all of the air defense, which is the radar systems. Yeah. So before we left, everything was calm because we left 10 days before this happened. We were told it was going to happen. But people in Ukraine, they wanted to keep the population calm, and they knew and understood that people needed to defend Ukraine. So they told them that the likelihood of an invasion had not gone up significantly in the last 3 months, which is true because Russia had been planning this for much longer than 3 months, been planning it for about 8 years. So did we have any difficulty getting food or other essential supplies? No, supermarkets were full. In all of Ukraine-controlled territories in Ukraine, the supermarkets still have all the food, everything that you need. Okay, what messages are being spread on social media? For the most part, it's about supporting Ukraine. There is some Kremlin propaganda, but now people are much more aware of it. In Ukraine, what has been spread on social media, absolutely, I can't even think of anything that I would say was remotely pro-Russian. I've never seen it. It's mostly about protecting your home and protecting your children and protecting your family. Do I still have family in Ukraine, and if so, are they okay? I do have some family in Ukraine, not my blood relatives, but family through family, and they are okay. Okay, so what has happened to Ukrainians living in Russia? We don't know. So I would imagine that they're fine because I guess they haven't started to go down that route yet. We hope that they won't. As far as we know, we don't know really. Okay, so what do you think about other countries not sending troops to Ukraine? I think that Ukraine can defend itself. I think that Ukraine has 400,000 combat-ready, experienced troops. I think that the thing that Ukraine needs is air support, air defense, to stop the missile attacks. Because what is happening at the moment is that Ukraine is winning on the ground, but Russia is firing on Ukrainian cities with missiles from Belarus and from Russia and from positions that they have taken inside Ukraine. What are my beliefs and feelings about the conflict? So I've been living in Kiev for 10 years. I speak Russian mostly. I speak a little bit of Ukrainian and I understand Ukrainian, but most of the time I speak Russian. this conflict, war, it's a war. We shouldn't call it a conflict, it's a war. Someone invaded another country, it's a war. That's my definition of a war. So this war is not about whether someone is Russian or whether someone is Ukrainian. This war is not about whether someone speaks Russian or speaks Ukrainian. This war is not about NATO. This war is about corruption. It's about the idea that one person and their circle of friends and family can steal all of the money from society. They can take the wealth of a country and they can have it for themselves and leave the people underneath them with nothing. That's what the conflict is about. So, or that's what the war is about. Because Ukraine in 2014 had an uprising called the Revolution of Dignity. And the Revolution of Dignity was when Ukrainians rose up against a corrupt president, Yanukovych, who was sponsored by Russia. And they kicked him out of the country, essentially. He ran away, but really the people protested against him for 3 months on the street. So that was in 2014. After that, Russia invaded Crimea, and they invaded the eastern territories, Donetsk and Lugansk. So, and then we would call it a low-intensity war, happened for the next 8 years. So this war has been going on for 8 years, but no one's been talking about it. Why? Because no one really could understand it. I think that's really what it boils down to. They couldn't understand the reason for it, even though Ukrainians have been talking about it for 8 years. Yeah. So, did I experience or see any of the fighting? No, I did not, and I have not. I was out of the country before it began. I do know people who have been exposed to the fighting, and they have seen it, and I do know a lot of people who are sleeping in bomb shelters every night. So, yeah. Do I think the economic sanctions are enough to stop the fighting? In the short term, no. In the long term, yes, because it prevents Russia from being able to manufacture and produce weaponry, especially if they are no longer being sold microchips and they don't have access to certain raw materials that they make the weapons from. What are my feelings towards Russia? So I would say that my feelings towards the Russian people are one of sadness and pity. Pity because they're being robbed, pity because they're being abused, pity because they're not being told the correct information or the truthful information. So that's the way that I feel about it. That that it's real sadness that these people are being lied to, they're being stolen from, they're being abused, and they're not being told the truth about what's happening. And so for us, one of the big things is trying to get that information to people in Russia. So trying to tell them what's happening, trying to get them to go to the street to protest. And there's lots of reasons why they're not going to the street to protest. And largely it's to do with a combination of brainwashing, fear, and propaganda. So, right. What did we take with us when we left? We took our clothes with us and some things that were expensive, some things that we use. I took my musical equipment. I took my guitar. We took our documents. That's one of the most important things, like our birth certificates, stuff like that. Do you feel other countries are doing enough to help? Yes, for the most part, other countries are helping a lot. I think this has been one of the most unified that the world has been against an invasion and a war. If not, what more could they do? Well, I think that they are doing enough, but there is one thing that they could do, and that is assist with Ukraine's air defense, because those missile attacks that took out the radar systems, it's meant that Ukrainian cities are being attacked from far off. So these missiles attacks are coming from very, very far away. And what it means is that Ukraine can't defend against those. It's not a fair fight, essentially. Yeah. How do I feel about conscription? Men aged 18 to 65 staying behind to fight. Most people want to fight in Ukraine. That's the reality. Most people are not scared to defend their home. There are some people who don't want to fight because they feel that they're better maybe suited to do other forms of defense, and that's what's happening basically. So if you don't have combat experience, you will not be fighting against the invasion. At the moment you're in reserve, and even if you get called up, most likely you'll be doing something like medical assistance. You'll be maybe cooking or doing logistics, taking from places, driving, those kinds of things. It's unlikely that people who don't have military experience will be doing fighting. That's unlikely. The exception to that will happen if this goes on for much, much longer, and what they will do is they will gradually bring people into teams and teach them on the job, as well as having some basic training beforehand. So what military training are they giving the people who have stayed behind to fight? They're doing some training, but mostly it's stuff like medical help. Most people in Ukraine already have had some experience with shooting. This war has been going on for 8 years. 400,000 people, or Ukrainians, have battle experience from fighting in the east. So what was happening is that because this war has been going on for 8 years, there has been a cycle of those troops. Now, why did people not call it a war for those 8 years? Because Russian soldiers don't dress in Russian uniforms. Russian soldiers are dressed as separatists. Russian soldiers at the moment in Ukraine are dressed in Ukrainian uniforms. They say that they are Ukrainian until you speak to them in Ukrainian and they can't answer. So this is part of what they do. This is the way that they wage war, through deception. So the other thing that they do is they are now dressing in civilian clothes, so that people don't know who is who. Yes, but we're aware of this. We know what's happening, and we are prepared to defend against it. We know the things that they do. We know that they take and send their ammunition in medical supply trucks. We know that when they are putting humanitarian aid, they are transporting military equipment in the trucks. It's something that we're aware of and that we know of what happens. We've been fighting this war for 8 years. The only difference now is that it's escalated, and there's no way that they can pretend that they're not doing it. That's the difference. So before they could pretend that they weren't doing it, it wasn't them. Now they can't say that. So I guess that's it from me. We're at the moment, a lot of people are saying glory to heroes, glory to Ukraine, Slava Ukraina, Geroyam Slava. And there's a few other kind of slogans that they say along with that, which is Slava Ukraina, Smrt Varagam, which is glory to Ukraine, death to the invaders. I say. Ka kite. See ya.